at 8 on the 5th of October, 1866. Georgiana Mowbray returned to Woolston Priory and found another woman seated in the Duchess's chair. Bell stopped her before the dining-room doors with such care that the gesture told her more than any warning could have done. Beyond the narrow opening between the panels, 23 guests sat beneath the chandeliers. Alexander occupied the head of the table. At his right, the Honourable Winifred Copley wore garnet silk and rested one white hand beside the silver rose that had marked Georgiana's place at every formal Woolston supper since her marriage. No other setting remained empty. No plate waited for the Duchess of Chiltern. Georgiana stood in the entrance hall, wearing the dark travelling gown in which she had spent nearly 3 hours on the road from Selworth. Dust lay pale along the hem. Rain had entered through a loose carriage seal and darkened one shoulder. Her back ached from the journey, but the pain did not reach her face. Her Grace was expected tomorrow, Bell said under his breath. Who gave the final instruction? Georgiana asked. His Grace confirmed the seating himself. How long has Miss Copley occupied my chair? Bell glanced toward the hall clock. 27 minutes, Your Grace. Through the opening, Winifred turned the silver rose between 2 fingers. Lady Miriam Mowbray sat opposite her, rigid with displeasure. 2 places farther down, Godfrey Copley leaned close to the carved dado behind the Duchess's chair. His smile suggested ease, but Georgiana knew the reports that had followed her to Selworth. 2 Copley properties had been mortgaged beyond prudence. Creditors had begun pressing him in London. Men did not always become honest when ruin approached. Some merely became inventive. Alexander had not yet seen his wife. He was speaking to Lord Ashbourne in the measured tone he used when politics required men to disagree, without appearing to threaten one another. The Harbury confidence escaped within a day. Lord Ashbourne said. Fane's debt followed. Now the Colonial Office matter has reached men who should never have heard it. Which means the source depends upon access, Winifred replied. If Her Grace appears to have lost command of the rooms, the person carrying private remarks may expose himself by changing his method. Georgiana felt the explanation before Alexander gave it. 3 confidences had left Woolston during the previous month. Lord Harbury's uncertainty over a railway vote had reached a government adviser. Sir Matthew Fane's private debt had been used to threaten his influence over a county appointment. A gentleman's intended opposition to a Colonial Office candidate had reached a rival before noon. Alexander had told Georgiana that someone with broad household access might be responsible. He had not told her that he intended to make her authority the bait. That is the purpose, Alexander said. Lady Miriam set down her glass. Your purpose required placing another woman in your wife's chair. Georgiana was not meant to witness it. That doesn't lessen the injury, Lady Miriam replied. It only means you preferred to inflict it unseen. Alexander's right hand went still beside his wineglass. Winifred had been Alexander's mistress before his marriage. Georgiana had known that much before accepting his proposal, and she had never demanded that a man arrive at the altar without a past. She had demanded only that the past remain where truth had placed it. Yet Winifred's ease beside him now suggested that someone had allowed an old intimacy to retain a private language. The wound was not jealousy alone. It was the knowledge that Alexander had selected this particular woman because society would understand the insult at a glance. A stranger in the chair might have created confusion. Winifred created certainty. Every guest would conclude that the Duchess had lost not merely a place, but influence over her husband and household. That conclusion was the lure. Alexander expected whoever carried Woolston's secrets to believe Georgiana's channel of access had been closed and reveal another route. Georgiana knew the stillness of his hand. Once she had mistaken it for absolute self-command. Now she recognized the effort required to prevent uncertainty from showing. Winifred leaned toward him. "She'll understand when she returns." "You'll address my wife properly," Alexander said. Winifred's smile did not alter. "Her Grace, then." "And she wrote that her journey would end tomorrow," Alexander continued. "She did." Godfrey shifted in his chair. A faint metallic scrape sounded behind the carved wall. His head turned at once. No one else reacted. He reached for his glass too quickly, then forced his fingers to loosen around the stem. Georgiana watched him rather than the wall. A second light movement came from within the dado, when a footman passed through the service door. Godfrey's attention flicked toward the narrow passage and back again. "Did Lord Copley speak with anyone in the household before dinner?" Georgiana asked. Bell hesitated. "He spoke with the under-butler near the service passage, Your Grace." "Could you hear them?" "No. The pieces did not yet form proof. They formed a direction." Georgiana looked again at the room. Winifred sat where Georgiana had settled disputes between political wives, corrected precedents before offense became feud, and given servants the confidence to act without searching the Duke's face for permission. During their first winter at Woolston, Alexander had once closed his hand over hers beneath the table. After she prevented two peers from turning a railway disagreement into a lasting quarrel. "You saved the evening," he had whispered. The memory did not soften what she saw. It sharpened it. He knew what the chair meant. He had chosen its meaning precisely because others knew it too. Bell lowered his voice. "Shall I tell His Grace that you've arrived?" Georgiana could withdraw to the east wing. She could change her gown, wash the road from her hands, and allow Alexander to explain himself in private. That course would spare him the public consequence of a plan built upon her humiliation. It would also teach every guest present that the Duchess had accepted being erased, so long as the erasure was called strategy. Inside the room, Winifred touched the silver rose again. Godfrey's gaze returned to the wall. Alexander turned toward the closed doors. For no reason Georgiana could see. His face changed slightly, as if the absence he had created had become large enough to feel. Georgiana did not mistake instinct for repentance. She did not mistake pain for weakness either. "How many servants know I'm here?" she asked. "The porter, your maid, the footman with your cloak, and those in this hall. Keep it so." Bell's brows rose. "Your Grace." Georgiana removed her damp travelling cloak and placed it over the waiting footman's arm. She left the dust upon her hem. Let the room see the journey Alexander believed would end a day later. Let Winifred see that garnet silk and a borrowed chair could not manufacture rank. Let Godfrey wonder what Georgiana had noticed before the doors opened. Most of all, let Alexander face the woman whose dignity he had entered as an acceptable cost in his calculation. "You may give away a place at your table," she thought, looking through the narrow opening at her husband. "But you may not decide what I will endure in silence." She straightened her gloves. The ache in her back remained. Her breathing steadied. Beyond the doors, 23 guests continued dining beneath the illusion that the Duchess of Chiltern was still miles away. Georgiana turned to Bell. "Don't tell him," she said. "Announce me, mister." Bell opened the dining room doors and announced, "Her Grace." The Duchess of Chiltern. Alexander rose before the final word had crossed the threshold. His chair struck the carpet behind him. The gentleman followed at once. Lady Miriam stood next, slowly enough that no one could mistake the act for surprise, and every lady at the table rose after her. Conversation vanished. Silver ceased to touch porcelain. 22 faces turned toward Georgiana. Only Winifred Copley remained seated in the Duchess's chair. Georgiana entered in her dark travelling gown, with dust still visible along the hem and damp darkening one shoulder. She did not hurry. She did not lower her eyes. Alexander looked at her face, then at the empty place where no setting had been laid, and finally at Winifred. The severity of his understanding came too late to protect anyone. "Georgiana," he said. "Your Grace," she replied. A footman rushed forward, carrying a spare chair. In his haste, one leg struck the carved dado behind the Duchess's place. Something small and metallic dropped from the opening, rolled across the carpet, and stopped against Georgiana's boot. Godfrey Copley drew a quick breath. He covered it with a cough, but his eyes had already followed the object. Georgiana placed the toe of her boot over it. "Remove that chair," she said. The footman looked toward Alexander. His hesitation lasted no more than a second, yet it revealed the damage of the evening. Alexander's voice sharpened. "You heard her Grace. You'll obey her." The spare chair disappeared. Georgiana bent with measured ease and retrieved the fallen object. It was a shallow brass cap, no larger than a crown piece, threaded along its rim. The numeral 4 had been engraved upon its face. Fresh, bright scratches cut through the older tarnish. She closed it inside her gloved hand before anyone could examine it. Winifred lifted her chin. "You've returned earlier than expected." Georgiana looked at her. "You'll address me properly." A faint flush rose above the garnet silk. "Your Grace, and you'll rise." Winifred's hand remained beside the silver rose. "His Grace assigned me this place." Every guest turned toward Alexander. The silence required more than an explanation. It required a choice. He stepped away from the head of the table. "Miss Copley," he said, "rise." Winifred stared at him. "Alexander, surely we needn't turn a seating arrangement into a public scene. You won't use my Christian name in this room." His tone remained quiet, which made the correction more complete. "Rise." Lady Miriam rested one hand against the table. "You were permitted to sit, Miss Copley. You were never entitled to remain. Indulgence doesn't create rank." Winifred stood. The rustle of her silk seemed louder than the fire. A footman placed her several seats away. No one resumed sitting. Georgiana approached the chair that had been used to erase her. The silver rose lay before the plate, intact and gleaming beneath the chandeliers. She reached for it. At the same moment, Alexander did. Their fingertips touched over the cool metal. For one heartbeat, she remembered his hand closing around hers beneath this same table. After, she had prevented two peers from turning a disagreement into a feud. "You saved the evening," he had whispered then. Tonight, he had spent her dignity to save his own certainty. Georgiana withdrew first. Alexander did not follow her hand. She lifted the silver rose and placed it inside her reticule. "You may give away a chair, Your Grace," she said. "You can't give away the woman who earned this room's respect." A change moved through the company. Lord Ashbourne lowered his eyes. Sir Matthew Fane straightened as if the words had named an obligation he had nearly failed to recognize. Lady Miriam did not look at Alexander. She looked only at Georgiana, and the steadiness of that gaze made clear that the room's judgment had not begun with a husband's command. Alexander received the sentence without defense. "Sit, Georgiana," he said. "You believed I wouldn't be here to see what you had done?" His expression tightened. "Yes. Then the lack of witnesses was part of your comfort, not mine." Godfrey pushed back his chair. "This has become unnecessarily personal. The company should withdraw." Georgiana turned toward him. "You were content to remain while another woman occupied my place. Your concern for privacy began after the brass fitting fell." His hand stopped against the table. "I've no interest in household metalwork." "Then you won't object while the circumstances in which it appeared are preserved." Alexander looked toward Bell. "No servant is to move the seating plan, service roster, written instructions, or any message delivered today." Georgiana added, "No servant is to be questioned alone. No one is to be dismissed. No panel, fitting, molding lock, key, chair, or item of dining room furniture is to be touched." Alexander's gaze moved to her. "Her Grace's instructions stand." Godfrey's mouth hardened. "You can't hold guests here against their will." "No one will be held," Georgiana said. "Anyone may leave. Mr. Bell will record the time, carriage, destination, and accompanying servants. Preservation isn't confinement." Alexander accepted the correction without argument. "Do as Her Grace says." Winifred rose from her lesser place. "Georgiana, let me explain what His Grace intended." She moved toward the doorway. Alexander stepped between them without touching her. "You won't follow my wife." Winifred stopped. "You allowed me to sit beside you, and I was wrong." The admission entered the room publicly. It was not yet repentance, but it cost him enough that no one could mistake it for courtesy. Georgiana addressed Mrs. Holt, who had appeared beside the service door. "The east wing is to be opened for me tonight. You'll report directly to me until further notice." "Yes, Your Grace." "Lord, Copley and Miss Copley are to have no access to private wings, household records, the estate archive, service passages, or key cabinets." Godfrey gave a short laugh. "You accuse us without evidence." "I haven't made an accusation. I'm removing opportunity while evidence is preserved." Alexander said, "The order applies immediately." Georgiana looked at him. "It wasn't a request." "I understand." Lady Miriam came to Georgiana's side. "I'll remain with you in the east wing." "Thank you." Alexander took one step toward Georgiana, then stopped when her posture changed. "May I speak with you privately?" "Not tonight." He absorbed the answer. "Tomorrow, then. You may send a note tomorrow. I'll decide whether to receive you." Georgiana turned toward the doors. No one sat before she left. In the east wing, Mrs. Holt brought hot water, a shaded lamp, and a small dispatch box with its key. Lady Miriam remained near the fire while Georgiana removed her gloves. Only then did the strain of the journey show in the stiffness of her fingers. She opened her reticule and placed the silver rose in the upper drawer of the writing desk. She locked it and kept the key. The object that had marked her place would not share custody with evidence. Georgiana removed the brass cap from her pocket and laid it upon folded linen inside the dispatch box. Mrs. Holt raised the lamp, while Georgiana wiped away only enough dirt to expose the engraving, careful not to polish the fresh scratches along the thread. Tarnish lifted from the inner rim. Beneath it appeared a second inscription in compact stamped letters. Lady Miriam leaned closer. Georgiana read the words aloud. W.P. Renovation, 1848. At 9 o'clock on the morning of the 6th of October, Georgiana sat in the East Wing morning room, with Lady Miriam beside the fire and 2 locked compartments between herself and the rest of Woolston Priory. The silver rose remained in the upper drawer of the writing desk. Brass cap number 4 lay wrapped in white linen inside the dispatch box beneath it. Neither object had moved since the previous night. Mrs. Holt entered carrying a sealed note upon a silver tray. From His Grace. Georgiana broke the seal. Alexander had written only 3 sentences. He asked whether she would receive him, whether Lady Miriam might remain, and whether he should wait for Samuel Rusk. Before discussing the renovation mark, there was no apology in the note and no defense. Georgiana folded it once. Tell him he may come now. Mr. Rusk can join us afterward. Mrs. Holt returned several minutes later. Alexander stopped beyond the half-open door. He wore a dark morning coat, and fatigue showed beneath his eyes, but his posture retained the discipline with which he faced political opposition. He did not enter, merely because the door stood open. May I come in? You may. He crossed the threshold and closed the door, only far enough to preserve privacy, without shutting Lady Miriam from view. He did not approach Georgiana's desk. He took the chair she indicated several feet away and rested his hands upon his knees. I owe you the whole truth, he said. You owe me the truth, Georgiana replied. Whether it is whole remains to be seen. Lady Miriam lifted her teacup but did not drink. Alexander accepted the correction. There were 3 leaks. Lord Harbury told me in the long gallery that illness in his family might force him to abstain from the railway vote. By the following afternoon, an adviser connected to the government whip knew he was uncertain. Who heard him? Georgiana asked. You, me, Harbury, and 2 footmen passing through. The second? Sir Matthew Fane spoke in the library about his brother-in-law's debt. The creditor learned of it before Fane could settle the matter privately and used it to threaten his influence over a county appointment. And the Colonial Office confidence? A gentleman told me at supper that he intended to oppose the favoured candidate. The rival knew before noon the next day. Georgiana watched his face. Miss Copley brought you evidence. 2 written extracts. One repeated Harbury's words closely enough that it could not have been ordinary rumour. The second described Fane's debt. She said a 3rd passage had been read to her from memory. By whom? She wouldn't say. Yet you believed her. I believed private information had escaped Woolston. That is not the same thing. No. The answer came without argument. She claimed the source depended upon access associated with your household authority. She suggested someone might be copying a memory book, private notes, or conversations overheard by servants accustomed to your rooms. Georgiana rested one hand upon the desk. Did you ask whether I kept such a book? No. Did you inspect the service routes or determine which servants had been near those conversations? No. Did you ask me before deciding that my authority should be removed in public? Alexander met her gaze. No. 3 answers, 3 opportunities in which trust had been available and fear had chosen something else. Lady Miriam lowered her cup. Then explain the chair, Georgiana said. Alexander drew a slow breath. Godfrey Copley's position is deteriorating. 2 properties are mortgaged beyond prudence. Creditors have begun pressing him. He still knows men whose reputations can be damaged. But he has less money and less time. I believed someone connected to him was trading information taken from Woolston. You suspected Godfrey. I suspected his need and his habits. I did not know his method. And you thought seating Winifred in my place would help you discover it. I thought a public loss of your household authority would make the source believe the route associated with you had closed. If the leaks stopped, the source depended upon your access. If they continued, I would know I had judged the method wrongly. Lady Miriam's voice was quiet. You made your wife the experiment. Alexander looked at Georgiana rather than his aunt. Yes. The admission did not lessen the injury. It removed the last shelter of misunderstanding. He had not stumbled into humiliation. He had calculated it. You did not merely remove my authority, Georgiana said. You displayed my displacement before 23 guests. I know. You knew what the chair meant before last night. His jaw tightened. Yes. Then don't tell me you understand it only now. You understood its meaning. You chose not to count its cost. That is true. You could have brought me the 3 conversations, the rooms, the hours, and the names of those present. I should have. Instead, you placed a former mistress in my chair, because society would understand the insult immediately. Alexander lowered his eyes. Yes, you wanted certainty without courage. His fingers closed once against his knee, then opened. Yes. Georgiana looked toward the drawer containing the silver rose. My dignity was the least expensive thing in the room. The words reached him without force of volume that made them harder to evade. There is no defense for that, he said. Good, then we will not waste time searching for one. Georgiana drew a sheet of paper toward her. These are the conditions under which I remain at Woolston and continue this inquiry. Alexander straightened. I'm listening. No one enters the East Wing without my invitation. Mrs. Holt reports directly to me. Lord Copley and Miss Copley will have no access to private wings, household records, the estate archive, key cabinets, service passages, or servants' quarters. Agreed. No panel, fitting, shutter, lock, root, or piece of furniture connected to the dining room is to be altered. Agreed. No servant is to be questioned alone. No servant is to be dismissed, because suspicion requires a convenient culprit. Agreed. No guest is to be detained. No gate is to be closed for the purpose of confinement. No room, chest, desk, or writing case is to be searched merely because its owner is suspected. Alexander hesitated at the final condition. Georgiana waited. If someone attempts to remove evidence, he asked, then we record the time, route, witnesses, and what can lawfully be proved. We do not become dishonorable in order to expose dishonor. His gaze held hers. Agreed. I direct the inquiry. Mr. Rusk, Mrs. Holt, and Mr. Ward will work through me. Will you permit me to assist? When I ask. Pain crossed his face, but he bowed his head. Understood. Lady Miriam set down her cup. And the Copleys? They remain, Georgiana said. Alexander looked up. Why? Because Lord Copley watched the wall before the brass cap fell. Because Miss Copley spoke of withdrawn access as though she understood more than a seating insult. If they leave now, we lose the opportunity to observe what they recognize and what they fear. Keeping them here may expose you to further injury. I am not asking you to protect me by making choices in my name. He received the rebuke without resistance. Then they remain. A knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Holt admitted Samuel Rusk, who carried a leather portfolio beneath one arm. He bowed to Georgiana first. Your Grace, I have the steward's working tracing from the 1848 renovation survey. The original remains in the estate archive. It stays there, Georgiana said. Of course. Before Rusk opened the portfolio, Alexander reached inside his morning coat and removed 2 folded papers. These are the extracts Miss Copley gave me. He placed them upon the edge of the desk without pushing them toward Georgiana. I should have surrendered them last night. Georgiana did not touch them immediately. Mrs. Holt, record the time and condition. Mrs. Holt brought the household memorandum book. The papers bore no visible signature, only copied passages in a neat hand. Georgiana placed them together inside a plain envelope sealed the flap, and wrote across it that Alexander had transferred them to her temporary custody on the 6th of October. Mrs. Holt signed beneath the notation. The envelope went into a separate locked document drawer, apart from both the silver rose and brass cap number 4, until Elias Ward could receive it formally. Only then did Rusk unfold the linen-backed tracing. Faded black lines mapped Woolston's principal floor. 5 routes had been marked in red. Number 1 ended near the servants' hall. Number 2 reached the pantry. Number 3 ran toward the warming chamber. Number 5 stopped inside an unfinished wall. Number 4 began at a small circular mark directly behind the Duchess's chair. Its line crossed a narrow service passage, turned behind the pantry, and ended in a chamber labeled still room, disused. Rusk traced the route without placing his finger upon the paper. The account describes short voice conduits installed for household service. Alexander leaned forward but did not rise. Can it still function? The tracing cannot tell us, Your Grace. The original plan may show the fittings more clearly. Georgiana looked from the red line to the locked dispatch box beneath her desk. Brass cap number 4 had not fallen from a dead wall by accident. Somewhere between her chair and an abandoned room, Woolston had been built to carry words. Rusk's hand stopped above the final circular mark. Number 4 begins behind your place, Your Grace, he said. It ends in the disused still room. On the morning of the 7th of October, the original 1848 plan showed that someone had built a road for voices behind Georgiana's chair. She stood in the estate archive with Samuel Rusk and Mrs. Holt while the survey lay open beneath a green-shaded lamp. The paper had not left the oak cabinet in which Woolston's oldest architectural records were kept. Rusk had unfolded it on the archive table and weighted each corner with a ledger block. The working tracing from the previous day had shown a red line between the dining room and the disused still room. The original revealed why. Beside the circular mark behind the Duchess' chair, the surveyor had written dining outlet. Farther along the service passage appeared a small square labeled manual shutter. At the opposite end, inside the stillroom wall, a second notation read receiver, trumpet removable. Georgiana bent closer without touching the paper. The shutter must be opened by hand. Yes, Your Grace, Rusk said. When it is closed, little more than vibration should pass. When it is open, speech near the dining outlet may travel through the pipe. Position will matter. So will the trumpet. Without it, the listener might hear rhythm, tone, or broken words. The trumpet would concentrate the sound enough to recover exact speech. Mrs. Holt studied the narrow route. Then this was never meant to preserve words. No, Rusk replied. It can only carry them while they are being spoken. A knock sounded at the archive door. Alexander stood in the corridor. He had not entered, though Mrs. Holt had left the door half open. Mr. Rusk told me the original plan had been found, he said. Georgiana looked at him across the long table. It has. May I come in? You may. He crossed the threshold and remained on the opposite side of the plan. He did not move closer to Georgiana than the table required. Rusk explained the conduit again in fewer words. Alexander's gaze followed the red line from the dining room to the still room. My father never mentioned this. It was installed for your grandfather, Rusk said. By the time your father inherited Woolston, speaking conduits had fallen out of ordinary use. Was number 4 ever removed? Georgiana asked. Rusk opened the renovation account beside the survey. There is no entry showing that it was sealed, dismantled, or replaced. Alexander looked toward the words trumpet removable. Then someone could take the listening piece away after each use. Yes, Georgiana said, which would explain why the wall appeared harmless until the cap fell. Rusk prepared a certified sketch while the original remained on the archive table under Mrs. Holt's observation. He copied only the dining outlet, the service shutter, the route, and the still-room receiver. Georgiana signed beside his certification. Mrs. Holt added her name as witness. Alexander waited until Georgiana looked toward the pen before taking it. His signature followed hers without touching it. The original plan was returned to the oak cabinet. Mrs. Holt locked the drawer and kept the archive key at her waist. Only the certified sketch left the room. Mr. Bell opened the dining room doors and recorded the names of those entering. The table had been cleared after breakfast. Daylight lay pale across the polished surface. The Duchess's chair remained beneath the carved rose in the dado, and the circular outlet stood exposed where brass cap number 4 had fallen. The cap itself remained locked in the east wing dispatch box. The silver rose remained in its separate drawer. Rusk crouched beside the opening with the certified sketch in one hand and a folded square of linen in the other. He examined the threaded rim without placing bare fingers against it. "There are fresh turning marks," he said. Bright lines cut through the older tarnish. The cap was worked recently enough to loosen when the spare chair struck the wall, Alexander asked. Easily, Rusk raised the lamp. A shallow scrape marked the carved edge beside the outlet. The exposed wood beneath was pale. Georgiana watched him inspect the molding and carpet. What else? Nothing black. No mother of pearl. No candle wax. Then the decorated instrument was not fitted here. Not from the traces visible on this side. Whatever had been attached to number 4 belonged at the still-room receiver. Mrs. Holt opened the service door. A thread of colder air crossed Georgiana's cheek. Rusk held his hand near the outlet without touching it. The draught strengthens when the passage opens. Alexander looked toward the narrow doorway. Can the shutter be reached from the dining room? No, Rusk said, only from the service passage. They entered the corridor in single file. The walls narrowed around them. One side carried the muted warmth of the pantry. The other remained cool stone. Rusk found the shutter plate set into the wall at shoulder height. A bright line showed along one edge. The screw slots were marked where metal had recently turned against metal. Someone knew how to use it without forcing it, Georgiana said. Yes, Your Grace. Who passes this point in ordinary service? Mrs. Holt answered. Senior footman, pantry staff, Mr. Bell, the under-butler, Mr. Rusk, and anyone shown the route by one of them. Alexander's expression hardened. The Copleys no longer have access. Georgiana turned toward him. They had access before I returned. He accepted the correction. Yes, Rusk did not open the shutter. No one knew what marks might remain inside the housing, and Georgiana would not permit movement before the still-room key history had been examined. They returned to the archive, where Mrs. Holt unlocked a brown calf-bound ledger containing household key issues. The still-room key had been signed out twice during the summer for routine inspection. Both entries bore Rusk's natural hand. A third appeared beneath them, dated the 17th of July. The name written there was Thomas Hale. Mrs. Holt opened the current servant register and searched every page. There is no Thomas Hale in service. Former servant, Georgiana asked. Mrs. Holt checked the pension and dismissal lists. No one of that name has served at Woolston during my 26 years here. Rusk leaned over the false entry. The letters are too deliberate. Someone copied a hand rather than signed his own name. How long was the key held? Alexander asked. 4 hours, Mrs. Holt said. No purpose was recorded. She unlocked the key cabinet and removed the still-room key with a cloth. Fresh scratches marked the bow. The edges of the wards showed recent brightness beneath old tarnish. This has been used within weeks, Rusk said. Georgiana looked from the key to the invented name. Someone knew where it was kept, how the ledger was arranged, and which servant would never appear to contradict the entry. Or which servant had never existed, Alexander said. The observation was correct. Georgiana did not reward it with warmth. Record the inspection, she told Mrs. Holt. The key was returned to its hook. The ledger remained in household custody. The certified sketch went into a separate, locked portfolio for later use. By late afternoon, Georgiana returned to the east wing and stopped inside the morning room door. Her reading lamp had been moved to the left side of the writing desk. The folding screen stood between her chair and the western window, angled to prevent the glare that often brought pain behind her eyes by evening. "Who arranged this?" she asked. Mrs. Holt placed the key ledger on the side table. His Grace asked whether the lamp and screen were still as you preferred. He moved them himself, then left before you returned. Georgiana touched the brass base of the lamp. The angle was exact. She had mentioned the discomfort only once, months earlier, during a winter supper. Alexander had remembered. The knowledge did not soften the chair, the concealment, or the decision to spend her dignity for certainty. It simply proved that a man might notice a small pain and still turn away from the greater one when courage was required. Georgiana withdrew her hand and sat at the desk. Before her lay the certified sketch, the false name Thomas Hale, and the record of a key used by someone who understood Woolston too well. Number 4 ran in red from the Duchess's chair to a room locked for years. On the 9th, Georgiana said, we open the still room. On the morning of the 9th of October, Georgiana unlocked the East Wing dispatch box and lifted brass cap number 4 from its folded linen. She placed it inside a velvet-lined brooch case and closed the lid. The silver rose remained secured in the separate drawer above it. Mrs. Holt waited at the entrance to the service passage with the still-room key wrapped in clean cloth, while Samuel Rusk carried the certified sketch of number 4 and a writing board prepared for evidence notes. Alexander stood beside the narrow door but did not touch the latch. No one handles the cap without my permission, Georgiana said. Understood, Alexander replied. Mrs. Holt entered the key withdrawal in the household ledger, recording the hour, the purpose, and the 4 people present. Only then did she place the key in the lock. It resisted at the first turn. On the second, the mechanism yielded with a hard metallic click. Fresh scratches shone around the keyhole. Cold air moved from the chamber beyond, carrying the stale scent of stone, dust, and old wax. The disused still-room had once held preserves and drying herbs. Empty shelves lined 2 walls. A cracked stone sink stood beneath a clouded window. At shoulder height on the far wall, a brass receiver projected from the masonry. Around it lay a clean, circular impression where a larger fitting had rested until recently. The fitting itself was gone. Rusk raised his lantern. The removable trumpet should mount here. Georgiana approached without crossing the nearest line of undisturbed dust. Beneath the receiver, a narrow black crescent marked the stone. A glossy flake, no larger than a fingernail, lay near the skirting. A second fragment caught the lantern light beside the sink, dark on one side and pale along the broken edge. Mother of pearl, Rusk said. Mrs. Holt found 2 smaller chips near the base of the wall. Georgiana studied the empty mounting. Black japanned metal with a decorated rim. That would account for both traces, Rusk replied. The pearl may have broken when the trumpet was attached or removed. A bead of pale candle wax clung to the ledge beneath the receiver. Dust covered the rest of the stone evenly, but the wax retained a soft edge and the faint impression of a recent drip. Someone had stood in that abandoned room with a light, close enough to listen, and had taken the instrument away afterward. A leather support strap hung from a peg beside the receiver. Its lower end had been polished by handling, while the upper buckle retained a grey film of dust. Georgiana looked at Rusk. It supported the trumpet, most likely, a metal instrument held against the receiver for any length of time would be awkward without it. He placed a clean sheet of paper upon his board. Using folded paper rather than his fingers, he lifted the black flake and each pearl fragment separately. Mrs. Holt watched every movement and recorded the order in which the pieces were found. Rusk folded the sheet into a packet, wrote the date, room, description, and names of those present across the outside, then pressed his steward seals into wax over the fold. Mrs. Holt signed beneath it. This remains in the locked household cabinet until Mr. Ward arrives, Georgiana said. He will examine the seals before taking it into his keeping. Yes, Your Grace, Mrs. Holt replied. Alexander studied the bare receiver. Can we prove that the pipe still carries sound? We can prove whether it remains open, Rusk said. Without the trumpet, we should expect only broken sound, not exact speech. Georgiana assigned Mrs. Holt to the manual shutter in the service passage. Alexander went to the dining room. Rusk remained with Georgiana in the still room. The shutter stayed closed while Alexander spoke from the far end of the table. Nothing reached them except a faint vibration within the wall. Mrs. Holt called from the passage, "His Grace is ready." Georgiana stood beside the receiver. "Open it." Metal shifted inside the stone. Alexander's voice arrived as a low pulse without words. "Can you hear me?" Georgiana caught only the rise and fall of the sentence. "I can hear that you are speaking, but not what you've said." A pause followed. Footsteps crossed the dining floor. "I'm halfway down the table now." This time, the words came as scattered fragments. Georgiana distinguished halfway and perhaps table, but the rest dissolved into the pipe. Rusk kept his attention on the receiver. "The conduit is open, but the sound is spreading." Another pause. Alexander moved nearer the Duchess's chair. His voice entered the receiver with greater weight, yet still broke apart. Georgiana heard beside and chair, then nothing certain. The tone was unmistakably his. The meaning was not. Rusk nodded. That is the limit without the trumpet. A listener might recognize the speaker, mood, and occasional words. He could not reliably copy a full sentence. "And with the trumpet?" Georgiana asked. "The horn would gather the vibration and direct it to the ear. Exact wording would become possible." Georgiana looked at the clean circular mark on the wall. Close the shutter. The metal moved. Alexander's next attempt vanished completely. The silence confirmed the rule. Number 4 stored nothing. It repeated nothing. The listener had to be present in the still room. At the same moment, a speaker stood near the outlet. The shutter had to be open, and the trumpet had to be fitted if the listener wanted every word. When Alexander returned, Rusk explained the result and showed him the sealed packet without opening it. "Someone removed the trumpet after realizing the system might be discovered," Alexander said. "Or removes it after every use," Georgiana replied. "We do not yet know which. Godfrey watched the wall when the cap fell. Recognition is not possession. Alexander inclined his head. No. They locked the still room, recorded the closing time, and carried the sealed packet to Mrs. Holt's cabinet. No one touched the shutter again. In the dining room, Georgiana opened the velvet case beside the Duchess' chair. Brass cap number 4 lay against faded blue lining, its engraved numeral bright where surface dirt had been removed. She lifted it with gloved fingers and knelt beside the exposed outlet. The threaded edge met the opening immediately. She turned it with care. The cap settled flush with the carved wood, restoring the fitting so precisely that the seam almost disappeared. Rusk compared the diameter and thread with the certified sketch. It is an exact fit. Alexander stood behind Georgiana without bending over her or reaching past her shoulder. Then it fell from this outlet. Yes. Georgiana reversed the turn, removed the cap, and returned it to the velvet case. It goes back to the east wing. Footsteps sounded in the corridor before they could leave. Godfrey appeared at the dining room door with Miss Copley beside him. His gaze moved first to the velvet case, then to the locked service door. An energetic inspection, he said, though I cannot imagine what an abandoned household convenience could prove. You know it was a household convenience, Georgiana replied. Godfrey smiled. Old houses collect stories. Winifred looked toward the carved wall. Speaking tubes were sometimes installed for elderly relations who had difficulty hearing. Perhaps one of Alexander's aunts required it. Alexander answered before Georgiana could. Neither of my father's sisters was deaf. Then an older aunt. There wasn't one who stayed at Woolston. Winifred's expression remained composed. But the explanation had arrived too quickly and contained too much detail. Godfrey glanced toward her. Family memory is rarely complete. False explanations are often more complete than true ones, Georgiana said. She closed the velvet case. The Copleys did not follow when the party left by the service stair. On the second step, the hem of Georgiana's dark day dress caught against a rough edge of stone. She stopped before the cloth pulled. Alexander stood one step below her. He did not seize her arm. He turned and offered his hand, palm upward. May I? Georgiana placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed carefully around hers, steadying without drawing her nearer. She freed the hem and found the next step. Alexander released her immediately. Thank you, she said. Of course. At the top of the stair, Georgiana turned to Rusk. The listener may know the words, but unless he already knows the speaker's movements, he may not know which room produced them. Rusk understood first. 3 rooms. 3 harmless statements, Georgiana said, each believable. Only one spoken beside number 4, while the shutter is open. Alexander looked at her and waited rather than taking command. When do we begin? Tonight, we prepare the phrases, Georgiana said. Then we give the wall something designed to travel. On the morning of the 11th of October, Mr. Elias Ward arrived at Woolston Priory by the first train from London and an estate carriage sent to meet him. By 10 o'clock, he stood in the East Wing morning room with Georgiana, Lady Miriam, Samuel Rusk, Mrs. Holt, and Alexander while rain traced the windows. Brass cap no. 4 remained locked inside Georgiana's dispatch box. The silver rose remained secured in its separate drawer. Mrs. Holt placed the packet recovered from the still room upon the writing table. Rusk's seal lay unbroken, and her signature remained clear beneath the notation recording the 9th of October, the disused still room, and the number 4 receiver. Ward examined the outside. Black japanned paint and mother-of-pearl fragments, he read, collected by Mr. Rusk's before Mrs. Holt, her Grace, and his Grace. Correct, Rusk said. Mrs. Holt and I handled the fragments. No one else touched them. Ward slipped the packet into a larger envelope, folded the outer flap across the original seal, and applied his own wax. Georgiana, Rusk, and Mrs. Holt signed the margin. This remains in my keeping until it is required before proper authority. Georgiana unlocked the separate document drawer and removed the envelope containing the 2 extracts. Miss Copley had given Alexander. The notation recorded Alexander's transfer, Georgiana, on the 6th of October and Mrs. Holt's witness signature. These were represented as copies of Lord Harbury's words and Sir Matthew Fane's private difficulty, Georgiana said. No authorship has been established. Alexander stood near the threshold because she had permitted him to attend but had not invited him farther into the room. I received them from Miss Copley, he said. I should have placed them in independent custody sooner. Ward read the notation aloud and opened only the outer flap before the witnesses. The 2 extracts remained folded inside. He noted their condition, replaced them, and sealed the packet separately. I will preserve them as received, not assume who wrote them because Miss Copley delivered them. Both packets went into his locked document case. 3 folded cards lay upon Georgiana's desk. Now tell me what you intend to test. Ward said. Georgiana placed the cards in a row. A listener may learn a confidence without knowing which room produced it. Number 4 begins in the dining room. But we cannot assume every leak passed through it. We need 3 statements in 3 places. Lady Miriam opened the first card. Lord Harbury may abstain from the railway vote because illness in his family has worsened. Phrase A, Georgiana said, the long gallery. Rusk read the second. Sir Matthew Fane has withdrawn from consideration for the county appointment. Phrase B, the library. Ward opened the third. His Grace will receive a ministerial emissary in private before noon tomorrow. Phrase C, beside the Duchess's chair. Alexander looked at the cards. Who knows the distribution? Those present now. Mrs. Holt will know the service timing, but not the wording before each exchange. You will know the test exists, but not which phrase comes until you must answer. And if I recognize one, respond naturally. I won't question servants afterward, or alter routes, shutters, or locks. No, a brief resistance crossed his face and passed. Agreed. At 4 o'clock, Georgiana walked beneath the portraits in the long gallery while Lady Miriam examined music near the windows. 2 footmen crossed at the far end carrying lamps. Georgiana lowered her voice. Lord Harbury may abstain from the railway vote because illness in his family has worsened. Alexander glanced toward the nearest portrait instead of the servants. Then we must keep it quiet until he speaks for himself. No one paused. No door moved. At 6, Rusk searched the lower library shelves while Georgiana stood near the fire with Alexander. Sir Matthew Fane has withdrawn from consideration for the county appointment. Is the decision final? It will be by morning. The words vanished into carpet, leather, and settling coal. After supper, the guests remained over fruit and wine. Godfrey sat within view of the service door. Miss Copley occupied a chair several places from Alexander and well away from the Duchess's place. When the final servants withdrew, Georgiana stood beside the carved walnut chair. His Grace will receive a ministerial emissary in private before noon tomorrow. Alexander answered, No one outside this room is to know. Godfrey lifted his glass. Winifred smiled at Lady Ashbourne, though her attention moved briefly toward the carved dado behind Georgiana. Both the Copleys had heard the phrase openly. If phrase C reached London by morning, It would prove speed, not route. It would not prove that number 4 had carried it. The guests withdrew. Ward left with Lady Miriam and Rusk to preserve the cards and record the times. Mrs. Holt closed the dining room doors. Georgiana remained beside the Duchess's chair. Alexander stood at the far end of the table, separated from her by extinguished candles and the distance of a marriage no longer protected by appearances. "The first test cannot expose the conduit," he said. "Not through phrase C," Georgiana replied. Godfrey and Winifred heard it directly. "Then why use it there? Because speed still matters. If those words leave Woolston before morning, the operation remains active despite the inspection. And if nothing leaves, the listener has become cautious or the trumpet has left the estate." Alexander looked toward the carved wall. "You believe Godfrey controls it. I believe his need has become greater than his caution, his debts. They explain urgency. They do not explain Winifred." His expression altered. "Winifred has always lived through access. Her father's house, Godfrey's title, the attention of men who made her feel indispensable. And yours?" "Yes." Georgiana rested one hand upon the chair back. "Tell me something you have not yet told me." He did not move closer. "What do you want to know?" "Why you trusted her accusation more readily than my character." The question changed his breathing. "Before our marriage, Winifred was the person I sought when I wanted admiration without scrutiny." Georgiana remained still. "She never asked what I feared. She asked whether I could overcome it. I learned to perform certainty for her. The physical affair ended before our vows." "Yes, but the performance did not." "No." His honesty entered without appeal. "After we married, I let her believe she still understood me better than you did. I answered enough notes to preserve the illusion that she retained a private place in my confidence. I did not meet her as a lover. I did not touch her, but I concealed that familiarity because I was ashamed of needing it." "Why did you need it?" Alexander's hands remained open at his sides. "With her, I could remain impressive. With you, I had to be known." The words settled between them. Georgiana did not rescue him from the silence. Known as what? As a man who doubted himself more often than anyone guessed. "I thought if you saw how uncertain I was, you would respect me less." "So you chose someone who asked less of you?" "Yes. And when she accused me, you believed the version that preserved your performance." His eyes closed for one moment. "Yes." Georgiana looked toward the empty place Winifred had occupied. "I could forgive a coward before I could live beside a liar." Alexander went still. "Is that another test phrase?" "No, then I will answer it." His voice lowered. "I have been both." He did not move toward her. "Do not ask me to comfort you because you have finally told the truth." "I won't." "Do not call shame change." "I won't." "Then continue telling the truth when it costs you more than this room." Alexander met her gaze. "I will tell it whether you forgive me or not." The following evening, during the formal autumn reception, Miss Copley raised her glass toward him and said with a composed smile, "A woman might forgive a coward, Your Grace. But could she live beside a liar?" Miss Copley's words crossed the reception room with the precision of something sharpened in private. For one suspended moment, the musicians beside the tall windows continued playing. Then the first violin faltered. Conversation thinned. A lady near the marble hearth lowered her fan. Across the room, Alexander stood beneath a portrait of his grandfather, with one hand resting upon the back of an empty chair. Color left his face before discipline returned. Georgiana knew at once that he understood the danger. The sentence had not been written, repeated to Lady Miriam, entered in Ward's notes or spoken before any servant. She had said it to Alexander the previous night, after the planned test had ended, and after the dining room had emptied. Only he had stood with her. Winifred raised her glass a fraction higher. "You look surprised, Your Grace." Alexander's gaze remained fixed upon her. "Where did you hear that? Does it matter?" "It matters very much. Perhaps a husband should be more careful with his wife's confidences." The implication reached the room before the last word faded. Several guests turned toward Georgiana. Others looked away, embarrassed by an intimacy they had been invited to witness. Godfrey stood beside the card table with one hand beneath the tail of his evening coat. He appeared composed, but his attention had become too bright. The Copleys had chosen the line well. If Georgiana accused Alexander, they would fracture the inquiry, and perhaps the marriage. If she defended him without question, they could make her appear desperate. If she remained silent, society would invent its own answer. Georgiana crossed the room. Guests opened a path without being asked. She stopped several feet from Alexander, leaving the distance between them visible. "Did you tell her?" He met her eyes. He did not pause long enough to search for a safer answer. "No, I didn't tell her." Winifred laughed softly. "How convincing." Alexander turned toward her. "I did not repeat what my wife said. You've learned denial quickly, and you've repeated words you were never given." 8 days earlier, Alexander had judged Georgiana without asking for truth. Now the same power rested in her hands. She could call him a liar before those who had watched him, humiliate her. She could make him stand exposed while the person who should know him best chose suspicion. That was precisely why refusing mattered. "I have heard His Grace's answer," Georgiana said. "I will not condemn him without proof." Alexander's expression altered with recognition, not relief alone. Winifred lowered her glass. "Then you believe him?" "I said I won't condemn him without proof. Belief and blindness are not the same thing." Godfrey stepped away from the card table. "This is an extraordinary amount of theatre over one borrowed sentence." Georgiana looked at him. "Only if one assumes it is the first private sentence to leave Woolston." Lord Ashbourne straightened. Sir Matthew Fane stopped near the musicians. Lady Miriam's hand closed around the silver head of her walking stick, but she did not interrupt. Georgiana turned toward the company. "This reception is concluded." A murmur moved through the room. She continued before dismissal could be mistaken for panic. "Before leaving, every household represented tonight will preserve its calling cards, invitations, messenger notes, and any communication received since arriving at Woolston. No paper is to be burned. No servant is to be dismissed or questioned privately." Lady Ashbourne's face sharpened. "Your Grace, are you suggesting that someone has been listening to guests inside this house?" "I am saying that words spoken in confidence have reached people who had no right to hear them." "And that concerns all of us?" Sir Matthew asked. "It concerns anyone whose weakness may be worth more to another person than his honor." Elizabeth Ward stepped forward from beside the western doors. "My office will receive sealed statements from any gentleman or lady who believes a private remark has been repeated beyond the estate. Original papers may remain with their owners unless proper authority requires otherwise." Godfrey's smile thinned. "You intend to turn every careless conversation into evidence?" "Only the conversations someone else has already turned into leverage," Georgiana replied. Mr. Bell entered at Lady Miriam's signal. The musicians lowered their instruments. Guests began withdrawing in uneasy groups, their whispers following them into the hall. Winifred remained near the mantel until Mrs. Holt approached. "Miss Copley, your maid is waiting." Winifred's gaze stayed upon Alexander. "You will regret allowing this spectacle." "The spectacle began when you repeated my wife's private words," he said. "Perhaps you gave them more freely than you remember." "I remember." The certainty in his voice erased her smile. Godfrey crossed to his sister. As they left, neither looked toward the dining room corridor. Georgiana noticed. Alexander noticed too. Neither spoke until the final carriage rolled beneath the portico. Georgiana withdrew to the small breakfast room overlooking the south lawn. One lamp burned upon the round table. Rain tapped softly at the windows. Alexander did not follow. 10 minutes later, a footman brought a note asking whether she would receive him. Georgiana gave permission. Alexander entered alone and stopped at the edge of the carpet. The door remained partly open. "May I sit?" "You may." He took the chair opposite hers. Less than an arm's length separated them, yet it held the history of their marriage. "You had reason to doubt me," he said. "Yes, the same kind of reason I claimed to have when I judged you." "Yes, and you chose differently." Georgiana looked at her hands. "I chose not to repeat your wrong." "That was more generous than I deserved." "It wasn't generosity. I'm trying to preserve the difference between truth and punishment." Alexander lowered his gaze. "I did not tell her. I heard you. I haven't met Miss Copley alone since you returned. I haven't sent her a note. I haven't given her any message except before witnesses. I understand what you're saying, but you don't know whether to believe me." Georgiana raised her eyes. "No, I don't." The admission tightened the corner of his mouth. He did not defend himself. "If you cannot trust me, I will accept that. Trust is not yours to demand." "No, when you accused me, uncertainty frightened you into action. Tonight, I am uncertain too. I will not let fear choose for me." His hands rested open upon the table. Slowly, Georgiana moved her right hand across the polished wood. She stopped before touching him. Alexander looked down at the narrow space between their fingers, then back at her. He did not reach first. Georgiana placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with care. He did not lift her hand or draw her nearer. He simply held it. "This is not forgiveness," Georgiana said. "I know. It is not a promise that I will return to you. I know, and it does not mean I believe you blindly. I would not ask you to." They remained joined through several slow breaths. His thumb did not move across her skin. He allowed the reassurance to be exactly what she had offered, and nothing more. "I won't believe you blindly," she said. "I won't destroy you blindly either." His fingers tightened once, only enough to answer. Georgiana withdrew her hand when she chose. Alexander released it immediately. Before either could speak again, hurried footsteps crossed the corridor. Samuel Rusk appeared at the open door, alarm breaking through his usual composure. "Your Grace." He looked from Georgiana to Alexander. "Workmen have been summoned for first light." Georgiana stood. "By whom?" Rusk's gaze settled upon Alexander. His Grace ordered them to seal the shutter. At 9 o'clock on the morning of the 13th of October, Georgiana entered the service passage and found 3 workmen preparing to drive iron nails into the shutter housing behind the dining room wall. One had already loosened the molding. Another held a hammer against the first nail. Samuel Rusk crouched beside the exposed edge, his face set with alarm. Mrs. Holt stood near the pantry turn, with the household key ledger pressed against her apron. Alexander waited several feet away. He had arrived before Georgiana, but had not permitted the men to begin. Once Rusk warned him that the inner marks might be destroyed. "Stop," Georgiana said, the hammer lowered. The workmen looked toward Alexander. That instinct revealed how easily authority could survive in habit even after it had been publicly corrected. Alexander stepped forward. "Her Grace gave you an order. You'll obey it." The men set down their tools. Georgiana approached the loosened molding without touching it. "Mr. Rusk." Another few minutes would have altered the evidence, he said. The nails were placed directly over the shutter housing. Any fresh marks on the inner plate might have been split or concealed. Georgiana looked at Alexander. "You ordered this after agreeing that no shutter, wall fitting, root, lock, or piece of furniture would be altered." "Yes." Why? His gaze did not leave hers. Miss Copley repeated words spoken when we were alone. I believed number 4 had to be silenced before anything else escaped. "You believed fear required speed." "Yes." "So you acted before speaking." "Yes." The workman remained silent. Mrs. Holt lowered her eyes to the ledger. Alexander turned toward the men rather than seeking privacy for his admission. "I overruled Her Grace's authority because I was afraid. I was wrong. This inquiry is under her direction. You'll remove nothing, restore nothing, and touch no fitting until she instructs you." "Yes, Your Grace," the eldest workman said. Georgiana faced Rusk. "Record every tool, nail, strip of molding, and hand that touched the wall. Note the hour the men arrived and the moment the work stopped." "Yes, Your Grace." "Mrs. Holt, remain until the passage is cleared." "Of course." The under-butler stood near the pantry door, his posture too still. "If I may, Your Grace, the fitting may never have been intended for ordinary service." Georgiana turned to him. What was it intended for? There was an old account of a relation who had difficulty hearing. A speaking trumpet was fitted so messages could reach her from the dining room. "Which relation?" Alexander asked. The man hesitated. "One of the late Duke's sisters, Your Grace." "Neither of my father's sisters was deaf. Then perhaps an older aunt." "There wasn't one who stayed at Woolston." The under-butler's mouth tightened. "I may have confused the story." "Who told it to you?" Georgiana asked. "An older servant. His name, I don't recall." Mrs. Holt's expression hardened. "I have kept Woolston's household records for 26 years. "Then before your time, perhaps." "Before 26 years, but recent enough for you to remember the tale and not the man?" Georgiana asked. The under-butler lowered his gaze. "I only meant to prevent unnecessary alarm." "False reassurance is not calm," Georgiana said. "It is direction." She looked at Mrs. Holt. "Record his statement exactly. He is to have no unsupervised access to the service passage, key cabinet, or still room." "Yes, Your Grace." The man swallowed. "Am I dismissed?" "No, suspicion is not proof. You will continue your duties under supervision." Relief passed across his face too quickly. Georgiana noticed. So did Mrs. Holt. When the men had withdrawn and Rusk had reseated the loosened molding without driving a nail, Georgiana moved with Mrs. Holt into the pantry. The under-butler could not hear them from the passage. "He expects dismissal or accusation," Georgiana said quietly. "Instead, he will believe he remains useful to whoever employs him." Mrs. Holt understood. "You intend to let him near the shutter again?" "Only when we choose the hour, never alone. Mr. Rusk or a senior footman will watch from the pantry turn. He must believe the old routine survives without being allowed a single unobserved moment. And if he refuses to act, then refusal becomes information." Alexander waited outside the pantry. He did not enter. When Georgiana emerged, he asked, "What do you require from me?" "Nothing today except obedience." "You have it. You said that before." The words struck without cruelty because they were true. Alexander bowed his head. Then I will prove it by waiting. By luncheon, the remaining guests had gathered in the drawing-room under a civility strained nearly to breaking. Godfrey moved among them with grave concern, advising early departures and speaking of Woolston as though the house itself had become disreputable. Winifred stood near the windows in pale bronze silk, telling Lady Ashbourne that Georgiana had allowed a marital grievance to grow into a campaign of revenge. Soon she'll have every wall opened, Winifred said. Some women would rather command an inquiry than preserve a marriage. Georgiana entered before Lady Ashbourne could answer. Some women prefer another woman's marriage because they have never possessed authority of their own. Winifred turned. You've become sharp. No, I've stopped dulling myself for your comfort. Godfrey approached with a courteous bow. Several guests wish to leave before evening. They are free to do so, Georgiana said. Mr. Bell will record departure times, destinations, carriages, and accompanying servants. You make ordinary travel sound like evidence. Anything becomes evidence when someone lies about it. Godfrey glanced toward Alexander, who stood near the mantel. Do you truly intend to let your wife turn Woolston into a tribunal? Alexander answered without looking to Georgiana for instruction. Woolston became a spectacle when I seated Miss Copley in my wife's place. I won't compound that wrong by silencing the person directing the truth. Winifred's expression changed. Godfrey gave a low laugh. Truth is a luxury for people whose estates are not mortgaged and whose creditors do not wait outside their clubs. Respectable society speaks of honor, but it obeys whoever controls private weakness. That sounds less like an observation than a creed, Georgiana said. Call it experience. Experience does not make extortion honorable. Before he could answer, a footman entered carrying a sealed envelope upon a silver salver. For Lord Ashbourne, your grace, delivered at the south entrance. Lord Ashbourne broke the seal. The colour left his face as he read. He handed the letter to Georgiana. It contained no signature. The writer demanded that Ashbourne withdraw his opposition to a pending appointment before the following morning. If he refused, a supposed private bargain involving the Duke of Chiltern would be circulated in London. The final line read, His Grace will receive a ministerial emissary in private before noon tomorrow. Phrase C, exact in every important word. Alexander read over Georgiana's shoulder without touching the page. That was spoken beside number 4. And heard openly by everyone at supper, Georgiana said. Sir Matthew Fane looked from the letter to Godfrey. Then it proves nothing. It proves speed, Georgiana replied. The sentence left Woolston within hours. It does not prove the wall carried it, because Lord Copley, Miss Copley, and every guest at the table heard it directly. Godfrey spread his hands. Then your elaborate test has failed. No, Georgiana said. It has shown us what the listener values and how quickly he acts. She returned the letter to Lord Ashbourne for voluntary transfer to Ward. Beyond the windows, a carriage rolled down the drive. The first test had not exposed the root. It had exposed the appetite. Georgiana turned to Mrs. Holt. Prepare supper for the 15th in the long gallery. Change the tables, bells, doors, and service order. The under-butler will be assigned to the passage under supervision. Alexander looked at her. What changes in the next test? No guest will hear the phrase. No servant will know its wording. Only Lady Miriam and I will speak it. Her gaze moved toward the corridor concealing number 4. This time, no one at supper will hear it except the wall. By the evening of the 15th of October, Georgiana had transformed the long gallery into a supper room, designed to expose anyone who depended upon Wolston's habits. 5 round tables stood beneath the ancestral portraits instead of one long table. Service entered through the north door and departed through the gallery antechamber. Bells were answered only by assigned servants. Courses arrived at unfamiliar intervals. Mrs. Holt recorded every person who crossed the dining room corridor, while Samuel Rusk moved between the pantry and service passage with the certified sketch of number 4 folded inside his coat. Brass cap number 4 remained locked in the east wing dispatch box. The silver rose remained in its separate drawer. The under-butler had been returned to his former route by Georgiana's order. But he was never alone. A senior footman watched from the pantry turn, hidden behind a screen used for warming plates. Rusk kept the opposite end of the passage under observation. Mrs. Holt controlled the service bells. The man believed routine had been restored. In truth, every step he took had already been assigned a witness. Shortly before the first guests entered, Godfrey left his chamber carrying nothing visible except an evening cloak folded over one arm. Mrs. Holt saw him descend toward the rear stair and disappear for 6 minutes. Rusk, positioned beyond the still-room passage, heard the door open and the light scrape of metal against brass. He did not enter. When Godfrey returned to the guest wing, the cloak hung more loosely over his arm. No one had seen what he carried into the still-room. No one yet possessed proof. Supper began at 8. Godfrey entered beside Winifred and paused when he saw the altered arrangement. "How inventive," Winifred said. "Have you abandoned the dining room because its walls have become untrustworthy?" "I have abandoned nothing," Georgiana replied. "Tonight, I am choosing how the house will be used." Godfrey glanced toward Alexander, who stood near the marble hearth. "And His Grace approves this experiment." "Her Grace does not require my approval to arrange her own supper," Alexander said. Several guests heard him. The silence that followed held more meaning than the words. Lady Miriam sat beside Lord Ashbourne. Sir Matthew Fane occupied a place from which Elias Ward could observe him without appearing to do so. Godfrey and Winifred had been seated where either would need to cross open space to leave. The first course passed without incident. During the second, Georgiana delayed one bell by 3 minutes. During the third, she advanced another. The prepared servants adjusted without confusion. Anyone relying upon Wolston's former pattern would not. Godfrey remained in his chair, but his attention moved repeatedly toward the gallery antechamber. Winifred spoke too brightly about the coming London season. Alexander stayed where Georgiana had placed him. He asked no question and gave no signal. At 9:15, Godfrey set down his glass. "I left a private dispatch in the west writing room. You will excuse me?" "Of course," Georgiana said. Mr. Bell opened the side door and recorded the exact time. Godfrey crossed the outer hall, but did not turn toward the west writing room. Mrs. Holt, stationed where the passage divided, saw him take the rear stair instead. She adjusted the cuff of her black dress. The signal passed through a waiting footman to Rusk. In the still room, Godfrey removed a black japanned trumpet from the receiver, mounting where he had fitted it before supper, checked the chipped mother-of-pearl rim, and settled it more firmly against the brass. He placed a shorthand pad upon the cracked stone ledge and waited. He had left the instrument mounted so that his absence from the gallery could be brief. Georgiana rose from her table. The eastern lamp in the dining room smoked earlier. I should like to see whether it has been properly trimmed. Lady Miriam set down her glass. "Shall I come with you?" "Please." No one else moved. Alexander's gaze met Georgiana's for one moment, then returned to Lord Ashbourne. He remained seated because that was what she had required. Winifred did not turn her head, but one finger tightened around the stem of her glass. Georgiana and Lady Miriam entered the empty dining room by the principal corridor. One lamp burned above the long table. The Duchess's chair stood alone beneath the carved rose in the dado. Beyond the closed service door, the under-butler waited at the shutter. The senior footman watched him from the pantry turn. Rusk waited farther along the passage, close enough to hear the mechanism, but not close enough to reveal himself. Georgiana stopped beside the chair. Lady Miriam stood within clear hearing. No guest in the long gallery had heard the false statement. No servant had seen the card on which it had been written. Sir, Matthew Fane has agreed to surrender the county appointment tomorrow in exchange for his Grace's support of his nephew. Lady Miriam answered in the measured tone of an aunt, discussing an unwelcome bargain. Then it must remain between us until the letters are signed. At the pantry turn, the senior footman saw the under-butler place his hand upon the brass plate. The shutter opened. A faint internal movement passed through the wall. In the still room, Godfrey pressed one ear to the trumpet. The horn gathered the broken vibration and delivered each word with terrible clarity. He bent over the shorthand pad. Georgiana repeated only the essential point. Sir Matthew yields the appointment. His Grace supports the nephew. Godfrey wrote the sentence exactly. He tore the strip free, folded it once, and placed it beneath the door leading to the service passage. The under-butler closed the shutter, retrieved the strip under the pretense of adjusting a coal scuttle, and carried it toward the pantry. The senior footman saw the transfer, but did not intervene. At the far end, Rusk marked the time. Georgiana waited 3 breaths before saying, "No one must hear it before morning." Lady Miriam gave the agreed reply, "No one will hear it from me." They returned to the long gallery within 4 minutes. Godfrey had resumed his place. His absence had been brief enough to pass as an errand. Winifred was questioning Alexander about a mutual acquaintance. He responded with formal courtesy and looked toward Georgiana only after she sat. She gave no sign that the test had begun. At 9:35, the final course was removed. At 9:40, Mrs. Holt adjusted the brooch at her collar. The under-butler had passed the strip to a waiting messenger through the pantry entrance. At 9:43, Rusk appeared briefly at the gallery doors and placed one hand against the brass buttons of his coat. The messenger was moving toward the south gate. Alarm would warn the room. Georgiana asked Lord Ashbourne to continue his account of the Dover correspondence until every guest's attention turned toward him. Then she crossed to Alexander. He stood. "Remain here," she said quietly, "until I tell you otherwise." His gaze searched hers once. "Yes." Georgiana moved to the card table near Winifred. "Another adjustment?" Winifred asked. "Only a small one. You have made a religion of small adjustments. They are useful when one wishes to learn who depends upon routine." Before Winifred could answer, quick footsteps crossed the outer hall. Rusk entered with the Southgate porter and a folded strip of paper held between 2 clean cards. The porter clutched his cap. "Your Grace," Rusk said. A messenger attempted to leave by the south gate. Godfrey's right hand closed around the edge of his table. Georgiana extended her palm, but Rusk did not place the strip directly into it. He opened the cards enough for her to read. 6 hurried shorthand lines covered one side. Beneath them, in ordinary script, appeared the words, "Fane yields county appointment." Duke supports nephew. Confirm before morning. Sir Matthew rose. I agreed to no such bargain. No, Georgiana said. You did not. Godfrey stood more slowly. A scrap carried by an unknown man proves very little. The porter looked toward him. Begging your pardon, my lord. The messenger entered this afternoon under your authorization. Godfrey's composure held, but the color beneath his eyes changed. That is impossible. Mrs. Holt entered carrying the Southgate book. The entry was made at 3:20. He stated that he had been summoned to carry Lord Copley's private correspondence. Ward approached without taking the ledger. The original remains in Wolston's keeping. I will prepare a witnessed copy. Winifred rose sharply. Let me see the entry. She stepped between the nearest table and the north door, drawing every eye toward the book. Anyone could have written my brother's name after the messenger arrived. The porter witnessed the entry, Mrs. Holt said. Winifred reached for the ledger. Mrs. Holt withdrew it beyond her hand. The movement altered the room's sight lines. For no more than 3 seconds, the north door disappeared behind bronze silk, shifting shoulders, and the edge of the open book. Then Mrs. Holt looked past Winifred. Godfrey's chair stood empty. The north door was settling back into its frame. A metallic scrape sounded beyond the wall. Alexander turned toward the service corridor by instinct. His body had already begun to move when he stopped himself and looked at Georgiana. She crossed the space between them and placed her fingers lightly against the sleeve of his evening coat. The touch was entirely hers. Now, she said. Alexander left at once with Rusk and 2 footmen. Behind the wall, a door struck stone. Hurried footsteps descended the rear stair. Then came one final metallic movement, sharp and brief, before the sound vanished into the guest wing. Alexander reached the rear stair with Samuel Rusk and the 2 footmen close behind him. The lower door stood open against the stone wall. At the turn above, the edge of Godfrey Copley's black evening coat vanished toward the guest wing. Alexander took 3 more steps before stopping at the threshold, where the service stair met the carpeted corridor. Godfrey's chamber lay beyond the next corner. So did his locked traveling chest, private desk, and every object suspicion might tempt a powerful man to seize. Rusk halted beside him. Your Grace? Alexander listened. A door closed softly in the distance. We have no independent witness who saw what he carried, he said. We don't enter his room. 1 footman looked toward the corridor. He may be hiding the instrument. Then we prove possession another way. No door is forced. No chest is opened. Alexander turned back toward the still room. The room smelled of warm wax and disturbed dust. The receiver stood bare. The trumpet was gone. A fresh black smear marked the brass mounting, darker than the older transfer found on the 9th. Beside the stone ledge lay a new chip of mother of pearl. The leather support strap still moved slightly, though no air crossed the room. A torn shorthand scrap had been crushed beneath the under-butler's shoe. The man stood against the wall, his face grey beneath the candlelight. He had not attempted to leave. Rusk closed the door behind the footman and said, Move your foot, please. The under-butler obeyed. Rusk lifted the scrap between 2 clean cards. Only 4 words remained legible. Fane, appointment, Duke nephew. Seal that separately, Alexander said, and the pearl chip. Neither is to be mixed with the packet collected on the 9th. Rusk prepared 2 small folds, while 1 footman witnessed, and the other fetched Mrs. Holt and Elias Ward. Alexander did not question the under-butler. He stood near the door and waited. The man's breathing became more uneven with every passing second. When Georgiana arrived, Lady Miriam remained with the guests in the long gallery. Ward followed Mrs. Holt into the still room, carrying his document case. Georgiana saw the bare receiver, the moving strap, and the fragment between Rusk's cards. Her gaze moved to Alexander. Did you enter Lord Copley's chamber? No. Did you order a search? No. Why not? Because I saw only his coat disappearing toward the guest wing. I would have been acting on suspicion, not proof. Georgiana held his eyes for a moment. Good. The single word affected him more than praise would have done. She turned to the under-butler. You are not required to answer questions privately. Mr. Ward, Mrs. Holt, Mr. Rusk, and His Grace are present. If you speak, your statement will be written and witnessed. The man looked toward the rear stair. Will Lord Copley know? He will know whatever evidence lawfully reaches him, Ward said. You will not be promised secrecy that cannot be kept. The under-butler swallowed. And my wife, Georgiana answered. Your guilt will not be transferred to her or your children. They will not be turned from their cottage tonight. Mrs. Holt will arrange a reasonable period for them to move if your position ends. That is not immunity for you. His eyes closed briefly. I understand. He removed the household keys from his belt and placed them upon the stone ledge. I'll speak. Ward opened his notebook. Begin with number 4. Lord Copley paid me to open the shutter. The admission was nearly a whisper. The first time was in August. He told me the old speaking conduit still worked. He said no harm would come if I opened it only when signalled. What signal? Georgiana asked. 2 light taps on the still-room side, then 1. Sometimes Miss Copley gave me the hour. Sometimes his lordship did. Who possessed the trumpet? Lord Copley. He kept it in his travelling chest when it wasn't mounted. Alexander remained motionless. Did you see it there? Ward asked. Yes, once when I carried coal to his chamber. The chest was open. He told me to forget what I'd seen. Tonight, Georgiana said. Who fitted it? Lord Copley did before supper. He came down beneath his cloak. I opened the still room for him, then returned to duty. Who listened to the false statement? His lordship. Who wrote it? He did. He pushed the strip beneath the door after the shutter closed. I carried it to the messenger at the pantry entrance. Did the messenger know the source? I don't know. He knew only that the paper was Lord Copley's. Why did Lord Copley return after the messenger left? To remove the trumpet. He always takes it away when he's finished. Tonight he heard that the messenger had been stopped. He came back before anyone could find the instrument. Rusk glanced toward the bare receiver and carried it upstairs. Yes. Ward continued writing. What part did Miss Copley play? She chose people whose affairs would matter. She listened at supper, in drawing rooms. Anywhere she might learn what kind of secret would hurt. She gave Lord Copley names and phrases. Sometimes she told me which conversation to expect. Georgiana's voice remained level. The sentence spoken between His Grace and me on the 11th, the one about forgiving a coward and living beside a liar. How did Miss Copley learn it? The under-butler looked at Alexander, then away. I opened the shutter after the formal test had ended. Lord Copley was in the still room. He had not removed the trumpet yet. I heard enough through the service plate to know it was private. His lordship wrote the words. Miss Copley asked for something that would make your grace doubt the Duke. Alexander's face lost colour. Georgiana did not look at him. Did His Grace give that sentence to Miss Copley? No, your grace. He didn't. The answer entered the still room quietly, yet it seemed to alter the air. Ward read the statement back. The under-butler corrected one time, then signed with an unsteady hand. Mrs. Holt Rusk and Alexander signed as witnesses. Ward sealed the shorthand scrap and new pearl chip separately. The surrendered keys went into Mrs. Holt's custody. "You will remain in the servants' hall under supervision tonight," Georgiana told the under-butler. "You are not dismissed until the household record is complete, but you will hold no key and enter no private corridor." "Yes, Your Grace." When the witnesses had gone, Alexander accompanied Georgiana to the east wing, but stopped outside the morning room threshold. She entered alone, then turned back. The trembling began only after the door had closed upon the others. Her hands shook once, sharply, before she clasped them together. Alexander saw and did not cross the carpet. "He did not hear that sentence from you," she said. "No, I believe you on that point." Relief moved through him, but he did not mistake its limit. "Thank you. Do not thank me for accepting evidence. You are right." The chair, Winifred, the concealed familiarity, and the public calculation still stood between them. Proof had removed one lie. It had not restored what another choice had broken. Alexander remained at the edge of the room. "May I hold you?" Georgiana looked at him. He did not open his arms until she crossed the distance herself. When she reached him, his hands settled carefully against her back. She placed her arms around him and allowed her forehead to rest near his shoulder. The embrace contained no claim and no promise. It held only the strain they had survived separately and the truth they now shared. Alexander did not kiss her hair. He did not tighten his hold when her breathing steadied. When Georgiana drew back, he released her at once. "The confession proves the method," she said. "It proves the sentence did not come from you. It does not yet prove Lord Copley's possession before those who must judge him." Alexander nodded. "Then we need the trumpet in his hands, not hidden in a chest, not described by a frightened servant." Georgiana looked toward the darkened corridor beyond the east wing. "We catch him using it live. On the morning of the 18th of October, Godfrey Copley remained at Woolston Priory because greed had proved stronger than caution. He knew a messenger had been stopped. He knew the under-butler had lost access to the household keys. He knew Georgiana had connected number 4 to the disused still room, yet he had not left. Elias Ward believed the reason was simple. He has spent years turning other men's weakness into income. The solicitor said, "He will not abandon Woolston while he thinks one final confidence may restore his position." Georgiana sat at the east wing writing table with Lady Miriam, Samuel Rusk, Mrs. Holt, Ward, and Alexander. Brass cap number 4 remained locked in the dispatch box beneath the desk. The silver rose remained in its separate drawer. Ward's document case contained the sealed paint and pearl packet from the 9th, the separately sealed extracts delivered by Winifred, the messenger strip from the 15th, and the shorthand scrap recovered in the still room. None had been opened. "Then we give him a confidence worth remaining for," Georgiana said. Alexander stood near the window. "What confidence?" "One that threatens your public position." He turned from the glass. "My support for the private appointment." "You will appear prepared to withdraw it unless the appointment is granted before midnight." Ward removed his spectacles. "If that sentence reaches London without explanation, it could be interpreted as pressure upon the government." "I know," Alexander said, "and if the accusation survives, you could lose the chairmanship before any inquiry clears you," Ward replied. Alexander looked at Georgiana. "Use it." She held his gaze. "Do not agree because you think sacrifice will purchase forgiveness." "I agree because I once protected my reputation by spending yours." If my name is the bait required to expose the men who used this house, then my name will bear the risk. Georgiana felt the truth of the answer without allowing it to become absolution. The wording, timing, and witnesses remain under my control. Yes, no one searches Godfrey's chamber, travelling chest, desk, or writing case before lawful cause exists. Agreed. And if fear urges you to act, before speaking, you tell me. A faint strain appeared around his mouth. I will. Ward had already taken the under-butler's signed statement and the witnessed copies of the gate book to a local magistrate. 2 constables would wait at the old gate lodge on the 20th under the magistrate's direction. They would not enter merely because Wolston's Duke suspected a guest. Civilian witnesses would first observe the live transmission, the fitted trumpet, and the secretary's transcription. Only then would the signal be sent. Alexander opened a leather portfolio containing his correspondence about the appointment. These go into your keeping now. Ward examined the packet without reading beyond the outer endorsements. Alexander sealed it, signed across the fold, and surrendered it before Georgiana, Rusk, and Mrs. Holt. The correspondence could later prove that no corrupt bargain existed before the bait was spoken. One more point, Ward said. The 2 written extracts Miss Copley gave His Grace remain separately sealed. We preserve them as part of the history of the accusation, but we do not pretend they prove who copied them. Agreed, Georgiana said. At noon, Godfrey's private secretary arrived by train and estate carriage. Mr. Bell recorded the hour. The secretary carried a long black writing case with brass corners and a narrow lock. He went directly to Godfrey's guest chamber and remained there for 20 minutes. No member of Georgiana's party entered the corridor. A valet later carried the case from the guest chamber to the west writing room at Godfrey's instruction. Mrs. Holt saw it placed upon the central desk. Rusk saw the valet leave empty-handed. Bell entered the movement in the household log. From that moment onward, the long black writing case did not leave the west writing room. Georgiana did not yet know what it contained. She knew only that Godfrey's travelling chest remained locked in his chamber, and that a new object had been placed within easy reach of the rear stair. He may have moved the trumpet, Alexander said when Mrs. Holt reported. He may have moved papers, Georgiana replied. We will not convert possibility into fact. No, and we will not open the case. Alexander's attention rested on her. No, the word came without hesitation. On the 19th, Lord Ashbourne, Sir Matthew Fane, and 2 additional gentlemen arrived to serve as independent witnesses. Ward met each carriage and explained only what each man needed to know. The secretary returned from the station agent that afternoon carrying a flat brown leather portfolio containing correspondence. Bell recorded it separately. Mrs. Holt confirmed that the long black writing case still stood untouched in the west writing room. No servant confused the 2 objects. No witness saw one become the other. By evening, Wolston had acquired the stillness of a house waiting for a storm it had invited. Georgiana crossed the carriage court with Alexander after receiving Ward's final report. The witnesses had taken their assigned rooms. The constables remained at the gate lodge. The under-butler would stand at the shutter under the eye of the senior footman. Rusk and Ward would approach the still room from the secondary passage. Mrs. Holt would watch the west writing room and rear stair. Every route had a witness. No one yet knew the true bait except Georgiana, Alexander, Ward, and Lady Miriam. Alexander stopped beneath the covered arch. Before tomorrow, there is something else I must ask. Georgiana waited. not forgiveness. Good. Permission to court you. The request was so formal that it might have sounded absurd between husband and wife, had their marriage not already proved how dangerous assumed access could become. Define it, she said. A card or note before I call upon you. No entry into the East Wing unless invited. Separate rooms. No public claim that we are reconciled. No touch without permission. No expectation that attention will earn a reward. And if I never choose to return, then I will still have become more honest than the man who injured you. Georgiana studied him. You may call when invited. You may walk with me when I agree. You may not use society, family, duty, or the fact of our marriage to press me. I won't, and affection will never be taken as proof that everything else has been repaired. I understand. He looked toward the gravel path leading back to the house. I want to become someone you might choose again. I do not want to remain someone who expects to be chosen because a ceremony once gave him the right to ask. The evening air cooled between them. Alexander extended his hand, though the stones beneath Georgiana's feet were level and dry. The offer was not assistance. It was a question. Georgiana placed her hand in his and deliberately threaded her fingers between his. His breath changed, but he did not tighten his hold. They continued across the court while Ward's reports waited inside, and danger gathered around the West writing room. I once sacrificed your dignity to preserve my name, Alexander said. Tomorrow I may lose that name's usefulness in public life. Are you afraid? Yes. Of the scandal, of wanting the world's approval more than I want to be truthful with you. Georgiana held his hand through the admission. What will you do with that fear? Tell you before I act, then do only what we agreed. At the entrance steps, she released him. Alexander let her go at once. Behind the western windows, one lamp burned in the writing room. The long black case remained upon the desk near the rear stair, unopened, unwatched by the man who believed he had hidden its importance and waiting for the secret Godfrey Copley had decided was worth one final risk. On the evening of the 20th of October, Georgiana unlocked the upper drawer of the East Wing writing desk and lifted out the silver rose. It had not moved since the night she reclaimed it from Winifred. She placed it inside her reticule, locked the drawer again, and kept the key. Brass cap no. 4 had already been transferred under signature to Elias Ward, who carried it in a sealed velvet case. No other evidence had left its appointed custody. At 8 o'clock, Mr. Bell opened the dining room doors. The Duchess' chair stood empty beneath the carved rose in the dado. Alexander waited at the head of the table. Godfrey sat near the service exit, Winifred between Lady Miriam and Lady Ashbourne, and the remaining guests occupied places chosen for sightlines rather than comfort. Mrs. Holt watched the west corridor junction. A senior footman stood within view of the under-butler at the shutter. Samuel Rusk, Ward, Lord Ashbourne, and Sir Matthew Fane waited beyond the alternate still-room approach. 2 constables remained at the old gate lodge under the magistrate's direction. Her Grace, the Duchess of Chiltern, Bell announced. Alexander rose first. Every gentleman followed. Lady Miriam stood. Then the ladies. No one remained seated. Georgiana entered in dark blue silk and crossed the room without haste. Winifred's face had lost the polished calm she had worn on the 5th. Godfrey watched the service door. Georgiana stopped beside the chair that had once been used against her and placed one hand upon its carved back. This time she chose it for herself. The room sat only after she did. Ward stepped forward with the signed transfer paper. He opened the velvet case before Georgiana, Rusk, and Mrs. Holt. Brass cap number 4 lay inside. Rusk fitted it to the dining outlet, turned it until the threads settled flush, then removed it again. Ward resealed the cap at once. No one touched the silver rose. Georgiana took it from her reticule and placed it at the center of the table where every guest could see it and no single place could claim it. Supper began. The first 2 courses passed beneath strained conversation. Alexander spoke of ordinary estate matters. Godfrey answered twice and drank little. Winifred watched Georgiana instead of her plate. After the final servants withdrew, Alexander lifted a sealed memorandum. After coffee, I shall remain in this room to read a private communication. Before midnight, I expect to speak a final government decision that must not leave Woolston. The statement was true only in shape. It contained no real decision. Godfrey's fingers tightened around his glass. Then perhaps discretion would be served by fewer witnesses, he said. The witnesses will leave before I speak, Alexander replied. Coffee arrived. Bell recorded the hour. Godfrey waited 7 minutes, then pushed back his chair. I have a dispatch that cannot be delayed. Of course, Georgiana said. Bell opened the side door and marked his departure. Mrs. Holt saw Godfrey enter the west writing room. The secretary joined him less than a minute later. Together, they lifted the long black writing case from the central desk. It had not left that room since the 18th. Holt watched them carry it toward the rear stair. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve. The signal passed to Rusk. In the still room, Godfrey placed the case upon the cracked stone ledge and opened it. Ward, Rusk, Ashbourne, and Fane saw a black japanned trumpet fitted within dark green baize. Its mother-of-pearl rim bore a missing section. Godfrey removed it and locked it to the brass receiver. The secretary laid shorthand paper beside the candle. At the service passage, the under-butler stood beneath the eye of the senior footman. He received 2 light taps and 1. He opened the shutter. Rusk raised one hand where Mrs. Holt could see it through the secondary passage. The confirmation reached the dining room. Georgiana looked at Alexander. Now. He left the head of the table and took his place beside the Duchess' chair. The silver rose gleamed between them at the center. He spoke the real bait for the first time. At dawn, I will withdraw my support unless the private appointment is granted before midnight. Georgiana answered as though testing the meaning rather than the root. Repeat the essential condition. Alexander did. I will withdraw my support at dawn unless the appointment is granted before midnight. The words entered number 4. Without the trumpet, they would have broken into fragments. With it, each syllable reached the still room intact. The secretary bent over the paper. Godfrey held the trumpet in place with one hand and pointed to the line with the other. Before the final word was finished, Ward opened the side door. Rusk entered behind him. Ashbourne and Fane followed. Godfrey turned with the trumpet still fitted to the receiver. The secretary's pencil stopped halfway through midnight. No one needed to ask what they had seen. Ward crossed to the ledge. Do not touch the paper. The secretary lifted both hands. Rusk closed the shutter by signal and removed no object. Ward folded the fresh strip between 2 cards and sealed it before the witnesses. Godfrey found his voice. This proves only that I was curious. Sir Matthew looked at the exact words on the strip. It proves you were listening to a sentence no one in the dining room had heard before it entered that wall. The secretary stared at the floor. Ward opened the original packet collected on the 9th before all 4 witnesses. The mother-of-pearl fragments were placed beside the damaged rim without being forced into it. Their curvature and thickness corresponded with the missing section. The black paint flake matched the visible finish in color and surface, though Ward made no claim beyond what the eye could establish. "When was this instrument placed in the case?" he asked. The secretary's face collapsed. "On the 18th. His lordship ordered me to move it from the travelling chest while we were in his chamber." Godfrey turned on him. "Be silent. You no longer command the truth," Ward said. Mrs. Holt sent the agreed signal. The constables entered under the magistrate's direction and took Godfrey, the secretary, the trumpet, the case, the fresh strip, and the related papers into custody. Only afterward did they seal the travelling chest in the guest chamber. No one searched it before lawful cause existed. When Ward and the witnesses returned to the dining room, every guest remained at the table. The silver rose still lay at its centre. Winifred had not moved from her place. Georgiana stopped opposite her. "Who told you I would return on the 6th rather than the 5th? Winifred looked toward the door through which Godfrey had been taken. "My brother. And the sentence about forgiving a coward? He gave it to me." "Why did you use it?" Winifred's composure cracked. "Because Alexander feared your judgment more than he feared losing mine. I wanted you to believe he had chosen me again." Alexander stepped forward before the room could turn the confession into gossip. "I did choose wrongly." His voice carried without force. "I believed an accusation against my wife before I asked her for truth. I seated a former mistress in my wife's chair and called the humiliation strategy. I made Georgiana's dignity expendable because I was afraid of appearing uncertain. I then nearly destroyed the evidence because fear again disguised itself as action." Her Grace led this inquiry. Every person who rose when she entered this room judged more honorably than I did. No one interrupted. "Tomorrow I will resign the chairmanship of my committee pending inquiry. I will submit my correspondence to examination. I will not ask rank, marriage, or remorse to excuse what I did." Georgiana felt the room change around him. Not toward forgiveness, toward truth. Lady Miriam rose first. This time she did not rise because etiquette demanded it. She rose because the public wound had finally received a public name. The others followed. Later, after Ward completed the transfers and Bell recorded every departure, Georgiana found Alexander waiting outside the small antechamber. He did not enter until she opened the door. "You may come in," she said. He stopped several feet from her. "I meant what I said before them. I know. And I mean this without asking you to answer." His breath moved once through the silence. "I love you." Georgiana looked at the man who had harmed her, obeyed her, failed again, confessed, waited, and finally accepted that love without truth was only another form of possession. "I love you," she said. The words did not erase the 5th of October. They made the future possible because neither of them pretended otherwise. Georgiana crossed the space between them and touched his face. Alexander did not lean into her hand until she let her palm rest against his cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes." She closed the remaining distance herself. His kiss was gentle, deliberate, and brief enough to leave room for choice. When she remained, he kissed her again with the same restraint. Georgiana drew back first. Alexander released her. "The courtship continues," she said, "on truthful terms. There are no others." "Good." Beyond the antechamber, servants moved through a house that no longer carried secrets for men who believed themselves entitled to them. Inside, Georgiana left the door open and allowed Alexander to stand beside her, not ahead of her, while the last witnesses signed their names. At 8 o'clock, on the evening of the 5th of October, 1867. The dining room at Woolston Priory no longer possessed a place from which one person could diminish another. 2 walnut chairs stood midway along, opposite sides of the table, equal in height, carving, and distance from the fire. The old Duchess's chair had been removed from use after number 4 was dismantled before Samuel Rusk, Mrs. Holt, Elias Ward, and 2 independent witnesses. Its carved frame now rested in the Woolston archive. Brass cap No. 4 lay in a locked case beside the certified sketch. The original 1848 plan remained flat inside its oak cabinet. The black, japanned trumpet had never returned to the estate. It remained under the authority of the court among the exhibits that had proved how private words were carried and sold. Before each of the 2 walnut chairs lay a small silver leaf. They had once been 1 silver rose. Georgiana had authorized a London silversmith to melt it in the presence of witnesses and recast the metal into 2 matching pieces. The original object no longer existed intact. Nothing had been restored by pretending it had never been broken. 24 guests waited beneath the chandeliers. Lady Miriam sat with her walking stick beside her chair. Lord Ashbourne argued quietly with Sir Matthew Fane about drainage along a disputed boundary. Mrs. Holt had approved the service order, and Mr. Bell stood beside the doors with the calm of a man who knew that no announcement could surprise the house as the last one had. When the doors opened, he said, "Their Graces, the Duke and Duchess of Chiltern." Several guests began to rise. Alexander stood first by instinct. Georgiana placed 2 fingers against his shoulder. "Not tonight." He looked at her rather than at the room. "Are you certain?" "Yes." He sat because she had asked him to. The others followed. No one mistook the choice for diminished rank. A year earlier, every person at the table had risen because Georgiana entered a room from which she had been erased. Tonight, no one needed a public gesture to prove that she belonged. She took the chair opposite Alexander and rested one hand beside her silver leaf. Supper began with no political bait, no altered bells, and no servant placed behind a wall. Lady Miriam complained that her physician had praised the walking stick too warmly, which meant he expected her to use it. Lord Ashbourne described a tenant roof repaired before the autumn rain. Sir Matthew admitted that the drainage dispute was partly his steward's fault. Alexander spoke of a school roof on the northern state and asked Georgiana whether the slate contract should be reviewed before winter. He asked, in the same tone he would have used before witnesses, not because he feared her judgment now, but because consultation had become ordinary. The legal consequences of the previous autumn had not arrived in one dramatic stroke. They had unfolded through statements, hearings, creditors, and the slow withdrawal of doors that once opened at a title. Godfrey Copley had been convicted of conspiracy to extort money and influence through the unlawful procurement of confidential information. His properties had passed under creditor supervision. His private secretary received a lesser sentence after cooperating and surrendering the papers that connected several older demands to the same method. The under-butler lost his position and every claim to household trust. He testified, surrendered his keys, and left Woolston service. Georgiana allowed his wife and children 3 months in the estate cottage and provided assistance for their removal. But she did not secure him another trusted place. Mercy to his family did not erase his choice. Winifred was not convicted. The evidence proved her knowledge, target selection, and use of stolen confidences. But not enough of Godfrey's financial demands to sustain every charge against her. Society supplied the consequence, the court did not. Her letters were returned unopened. No Copley invitation entered Woolston. She withdrew to the house of a married cousin far from London, where private access no longer resembled power. Alexander resigned the chairmanship of his committee and submitted his correspondence. The inquiry found no corrupt bargain. It did not restore every man's confidence in him, nor did he ask it to. Months passed before he accepted public work again, and then only work whose decisions could be examined without secrecy. Georgiana spent the first 4 months after the arrest in the East Wing. Alexander sent a card before every call. At first, she received him for 20 minutes with the door open and Lady Miriam nearby. Later came daylight tea, then walks, then suppers for 2 in rooms that held no hidden conduit. In February, Georgiana chose to return to the shared apartments. There was no announcement and no second ceremony. Mrs. Holt moved Georgiana's books, 2 lamps, and the screen that protected her eyes from the western glare. Alexander entered only after Georgiana invited him. The house learned the difference between reconciliation and surrender because it watched her choose each step. During the final course of the anniversary supper, Alexander placed his fork beside his plate. A letter came from London this morning. Georgiana looked up. Concerning what? A new committee examining railway contracts and county influence. They've asked me to serve. Several guests heard, but he spoke to her. Do you wish to? Part of me does, and the other part. He glanced at the silver leaf before him. The other part is afraid that public usefulness will become another place where I can appear impressive instead of being honest. No one at the table pretended not to hear. Alexander no longer kept his fear private until it became someone else's burden. Georgiana asked, "What will you do?" "Read every paper with Ward. Determine whether the work is necessary and whether I can do it without hiding inside it. If I cannot, I'll refuse. And if you can, I'll accept only if the terms allow scrutiny." Georgiana turned her right-hand palm upward upon the table. Alexander saw the invitation and waited 1 heartbeat before placing his hand in hers. Their fingers closed together without concealment. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you too," Georgiana replied. Lady Miriam looked down at her plate with an expression of satisfaction she would have denied under oath. The conversation resumed around them. Georgiana did not release Alexander's hand until the servants brought the final tray. When the last carriage had departed and Mr. Bell closed the outer doors, Georgiana returned to the dining room. Only 2 lamps remained burning. The matching silver leaves still lay opposite one another. Alexander stood beside his chair, waiting rather than assuming she had come for him. "You may rise for me tomorrow," Georgiana said. "Tonight I wanted you beside me. I wanted that too." She crossed the space between the 2 places. He did not reach for her. Georgiana laid her palm against his cheek and kissed him before he could ask. Surprise softened into tenderness. His hand settled at her waist only when she leaned closer, and when she drew back, he let her choose the distance. "I did not return to the marriage we had," she said. "I know. I chose the one we built afterward." Alexander touched his forehead to hers. "Then I will keep choosing it with you." She kissed him again, slower this time, and his arms closed around her in an embrace that held no claim beyond what she freely gave. When they finally turned toward the door, Georgiana took one silver leaf and Alexander took the other. The old chair remained in the archive. The conduit carried no voice. Their hands remained joined, and no silence between them remained unexplained.